Good morning, everybody. We'll get started in just a moment. We'll give a chance for everyone to come in on the Zoom meeting. Thanks for being here. Maybe less than a minute, we'll get started. If you're just jumping on, we're going to give maybe 30 more seconds just to let people get into the meeting here, and then we'll get started. So appreciate you being here. We'll get started in just a moment. All right, this looks like a good time. Thanks everybody for being here. Good morning. We really appreciate your time and hope to give you some good information this morning about this project. So as we do get started, I want to let you know that we do have ASL interpreters here, as you can see on your screen. You know, you've got that there, and also today's information session is captioned as well, and you can enable those captions in your own Zoom window and adjust the size of and appearance of the words on your screen also. So thank you very much to everyone for being here. Thanks for being here for this information session about CSU's redevelopment plan for the property where Hughes Stadium and the parking lots used to be. Hopefully you've had a chance to go through some of the information and watch the video that was in the announcement that we posted in Source announcing this session. I'm Mike Hooker. I'm the Director of Media Relations and Denver Outreach in University Communications, and I'll be your moderator for today. If you want to submit a question, please go to the Zoom toolbar to the Q&A, and you can put your question there. And there's a very good chance, likely, that we won't be able to get to all the questions in this time. So we will get back to you. If we don't get to answer the question live, we'll definitely get back to you, as long as you can leave some contact information and email so that we can find you later. Please do that. And as we're going through the questions, we'll get to as many as we can. Quick information about how this came about, and then I'll introduce the panelists that you see on your screen. This redevelopment project has been in the works since the old stadium was torn down, and it's evolved over time. So some of the information that you hear today may be different than what you heard originally a year or two ago. That's because the project continues to evolve. And CSU had been sharing this plan at places like city council meetings or CSU Board of Governors meetings in the official processes, but not necessarily sharing it with all of you and with the general public in ways that we frankly should have been. It's a really important project, and that's what we're doing now, is making sure that we get that information out. So thanks for your information. These are some really important topics addressed by this project in our community, like affordable and attainable housing and childcare and healthcare, sustainability, and all the complexities around addressing these community needs. And as you'll hear a bit more today, this project is a direct benefit to CSU employees. So thank you again for being here. Let me go ahead and introduce our panel for today. Joyce McConnell is the president of Colorado State University. Brett Anderson is the special advisor to the chancellor for the CSU system, and Brett is leading this project. And Fred Habrecht, he's the university planner, and he has a wealth of knowledge of CSU's various current projects as well as past projects. So today, Brett's going to do a presentation for about 20 minutes, and then we'll answer any questions that come through on the Q&A. Remember, submit the questions there at the bottom of the screen. And then first, I'd like to turn it over to President McConnell for some opening thoughts. President McConnell.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'm so really delighted to be here today for the Hughes site redevelopment plan presentation. And I want to thank all of our panelists, and particularly our two ASL interpreters. I know they make a huge difference for our audience, and I want to thank them for being here today. I also want to acknowledge the land acknowledgement, which we will be posting in the chat. And that is our acknowledgement honoring and giving tribute to the sovereign nations whose land we are built upon and that continue to inspire us today. Today is a really wonderful opportunity for us to share with you the redevelopment plan for the Hughes site. We're very proud of the work that we're doing in development of the Hughes site because we believe it reflects our deepest values as a land-grant university that is committed and has had a long legacy of commitment to sustainability and sustainable development. I think you'll hear that today. I know you'll hear that today from Brett Anderson and from Fred Hambrick, and you will hear it from me as we go through this presentation. What I want to assure you is that our focus is really on three things: the values of CSU, our commitment to sustainability, and our commitment to our people, to give them an opportunity to live in the wonderful community of Fort Collins in housing that is affordable to them and provides them the kind of services that we know they deserve. Thank you, Mike. Thank you for allowing me to give this brief introduction.
Thank you, President McConnell. I appreciate that. And now let's turn it over to Brett Anderson to give a presentation about the plans for the project. Brett.
You bet. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to get a little bit more information about the Hughes project. Hopefully today, what we can do is share with you some new information, as well as possibly correct some misinformation that's out there. We do know that there's a lack of information about what this project is, as well as there is a good deal of incorrect information out there. So we'll try to share with you the plan, and also we will try to address as many questions as we possibly can today. So I'm going to give an overview of the project, hopefully give you a sense for what all's included, and then we're going to open it up after that for some questions. Now, to start with, I just wanted to start with, how did we come up with this plan? As Mike said, it's been years in the making, and the Hughes Stadium site was shut down well over 3 years ago. And what we've done since then is we've done some comprehensive surveying of our campus community in terms of what are the key needs of our employees. We want to, as one of the leading employers in Northern Colorado, we want to ensure that we're addressing our employees' needs. So we did a comprehensive survey in 2015 and another one in 2019. And what we found from that survey is the number one issue overwhelmingly is our employees are saying it's a real challenge to find affordable housing, whether that's rentals or to buy. That is the number one issue that our employees just gave us hands down. But then behind that, there were several secondary priorities that our employees said were very important to them. Is daycare. Finding affordable and accessible and quality childcare is a real challenge. Finding affordable, accessible medical care is another real challenge. And then, as we all know, and as President McConnell mentioned, sustainability is at our core. It is something that we are about at CSU. We're a leader in that. So we heard that. So those were some key priorities that we heard when we talked to our employees. We then compared that to what is the city being, what are they hearing? What's the city of Fort Collins hearing from all of their constituents? And when we talk to the city council and the various city staff, they're saying that, once we get through COVID, that is absolutely everybody's number one priority, is dealing with the pandemic and getting us through that. But after that, they say their number one issue is affordable housing in the city of Fort Collins. So we look at that and say that we're very well aligned with the city's needs. And also there's a city strategic plan that the city created in 2019 that kind of lays out where development should happen within the city, what kind of development. And what we wanted to do is ensure that this matches that plan very well. And that is absolutely what we've done. Then we also took into consideration is, what is this land? This land has served as a site for a stadium and a parking lot for well over 50 years. It had 52 acres of hard surface of concrete and asphalt and a stadium on it. So it has been evolved over the years, and it was its most recent rendition a an operating stadium and event venue. And then lastly, we wanted to ensure that we're doing the right thing for all of our constituents, and that is the citizens of Colorado. We are a state university, and we want to ensure that our fiduciary responsibility is there, and we're doing the right thing by all of our taxpayers to the state of Colorado. So that's what went into the plan. So now I can go to the next page, and we'll give you an idea what the plan actually entails. A picture is worth 1,000 words. So we're going to start with this picture here. So this is the property that you see right there. And the top of the page is the west. So right above what you'd see on this picture is the big Aggie A. The big white Aggie A sits right above that. And then down at the bottom, running across the screen, is Overland Trail. So that's to just give you an orientation of where we're at. And you'll see that there's some light yellow homes. Those are single family homes that we're going to be putting on the property. There's 242 single family homes that are in that light yellow. And then as we move slightly to the east and over on the north side, you'll see 112 what are called paired homes. Those paired homes are what many of us might call a duplex, or in today's terms, they call them a paired home. And then there's 108 townhomes just to the south and a little bit to the east of those paired homes. So those are the 4 purchased properties that would be on here, a little over 450. And then as we continue working our way to the east, and I'll start in the far northeast corner, there's a series of buildings that are an apartment complex. So we're intending to develop somewhere between 170 and 200 affordable apartments. The reason that number is still up in the air is we are working with the employee base to understand the right mix of 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom apartments. We want to ensure that we're addressing the key needs of our employees. So as that mix changes, it could be as few as 170, it could be as many as 200, but it'll be in that range. And 100% of these apartments will be at what's defined as the federal affordability level, which means they're at an 80% AMI level. So 80% of the area median income. So that is the definition of federally affordable. And we are going to ensure that 100% of them are offered at that rate or lower. Then as we go a little bit to the south of the apartments, you'll see that we're going to have an urgent care center. So this will be a critical urgent care center for both mental health needs and physical health needs. We think that's a key priority that we need to set up for this community and for the western side of Fort Collins. Then in addition to that, we're going to have a child care center that will be able to accommodate about 150 children, all the way from infants on up. Again, we're seeing that, and this is even becoming a higher priority with COVID, is we found that daycare and childcare, those facilities have really struggled during the pandemic, and many of them are closing their doors. So we see that there's going to be even a higher priority need for childcare and affordable childcare. So that's what this is going to provide, is 150 capacity childcare facility. Then in addition to that, we are going to put a transit center. We believe that in terms of sustainability, we want to ensure that these folks can get all around the Fort Collins community in northern Colorado without having to use their car. So we're going to put a transit center in there that will have access to all sorts of transport lines that will allow you to get to the MAX, allow you to get to all other bus lines, so you can get to the west side or the east side of town, the south side of town, the north side of town. So we believe that's going to be a key component where these folks will be able to get to and from wherever they need to go without always having to use their car. And that will also be a great amenity for these folks on this western side of town. And then lastly, and definitely not least, is we love open space. I mean, I think all of us love open space, and it's been cast out there that this is there's a decision out there between making the Hughes property open space or the CSU plan. And we like to think of our plan as an and. We don't think everything has to be a binary decision of this or that. We think we can address many priorities across the entire community with this wonderful asset. And we are going to ensure that there's a lot of open space. So when you look at this plan, you'll see that there are 74 acres of open space still remaining on this property. Where you see the little pointer right now on the far west side of town, or west side of the property, you'll see that we're maintaining a large buffer of open space to the Maxwell open area. We want to ensure that we don't have homes infringing on that. We have trail connectivity so that members of this community can easily get to those trail systems. Members of the general community can easily get to the trail system. You'll also see on the northwest a large park. That's where the old Hughes Stadium itself sat. So we're going to turn that into a large green space park that's accessible to everybody in this community as well as the whole Fort Collins community. So a great asset and amenity right there. And then when you come down to the far southeast, you'll see this large open space there. And that is where the current disc golf course is. We're going to maintain that. Plus you'll see additional space around that. So when it's all said and done, nearly 50% of the property will remain open space. So 74 out of 161 acres will remain open space. So we think this is a great and solution. We can do affordable housing and daycare and healthcare and transit and sustainability and open space. So that's kind of the plan in a nutshell. So we can go to the next page maybe and just show you, it's just a little bit of a zoom in on a component where the apartments and the daycare and the childcare. And one other aspect I'd like to bring up in there that we are still finalizing the plan for is we have the ability to put anywhere up to about 20,000 square feet of commercial or retail space in there. And we're looking to decide what should or could that be. Should that be a coffee shop? Should that be a bike shop? What should it be? So we want to work with the community in the west side of Fort Collins to say what amenity would be very useful to put out there on the western side that would actually be helpful to the broader community. So that's another component that will be part of the plan. So wanted to just roll that in. And then lastly, before I get to just a summarization, then we'll probably be able to take some questions here fairly soon, is there's been a lot of discussion about, you know, CSU just taking this property and selling it off to Lennar as the developer and walking away. And I would like to assure all of you that nothing is further from the truth than that. We, CSU, have been a member of this community for 150 plus years. We're going to be here for another 150 plus. This is our community. We're committed to Fort Collins. We love Fort Collins. The relationship is so important that this is a project that we are going to have our hands in for the long haul. So when this project goes into the detailed discussions with all the various city entities, CSU is going to be the lead on that. CSU is not walking away. We will be the lead taking the project through the process. We also will be maintaining a good percentage of this property in perpetuity. So when we talk about all the apartments and the commercial spaces and all of that, that is going to be CSU maintained properties. So those are things that will be owned by CSU. That's how we ensure the affordability is we'll own it. We will have an operating agreement with whoever operates those to ensure that they meet our criteria. So for example, when we're talking about 80% AMI rents, that's how we assure that in perpetuity so that they will always be there because that's still something that we have control over. So just wanted to address those things and then maybe just go to the next page and we'll kind of just summarize a few things. Is we as a land grant university think that one of the most important things that we can do is about access and equity. It's a critical component in, especially with everything that's going on to today's society. And we think that that's incredibly important. This is the opportunity for us to make a big impact on that. We think Fort Collins should be accessible to everybody. It shouldn't just be for those of us that are wealthy enough to live in Fort Collins and enjoy this wonderful community and its open spaces. We think we should provide the opportunity for all folks, no matter what your income levels are, to be able to be within this wonderful city. And we think it addresses that. We think we also can address the childcare. There's a big gap in the west side of Fort Collins for both healthcare and childcare. And we think we can help address that. We think we can provide high quality, reasonably priced opportunities for not just this new community, but for everybody else that lives on the west side of town. And then sustainability and open space, we think we've got a large commitment to that. We know we've got a large commitment to that. And on this next page, just give you a sense of why we believe this is even more suitable to the sustainability aspect, is the fact that we've done a bit of a study to look at, if we were to do this development, we could reduce about 1.5 million commuting miles per year. So by having people living closer to where they work versus commuting in from Wellington or Timnath or Windsor or Frederick or Firestone, or all those places that they're having to commute in from today because they can't afford to live in Fort Collins, we can reduce 1.5 million commuting miles, which is about 430 metric tons of carbon, which translates to about 9% of this year's faculty and staff commuting footprint at CSU. So we can make a big impact on that. We think also, for just the general community, that's just the CSU component. For the general community, we can reduce a lot of commuting by having that transit center there. We also are looking at all these homes to be very sustainable as well. Lennar has committed to us to look at gray water technology for these homes, solar technology for these homes, minimal lot lines with xeriscaping and very reduced water usage. So we think this is a way for us to put a community out there that leads in terms of sustainability and really is an example of how to do things right. And it provides that opportunity for those that currently just can't afford to live in our wonderful city. So with that, that's a high level summary of the plan that I'll stop there. And I think Mike's going to then start looking through all the questions and start seeing if we can answer some of your questions.
Hi, Brett. Yeah, thanks for going over that information. And we've got some questions. And what I'll do is some of these fall in, we get several questions on one topic or that are virtually the same topic. So I may combine some of those to just to keep them categorized. One of the things that we do see coming in, this is the way you do affordable housing and how you sort of keep a long-term benefit of that. That's a challenge we've seen as we've looked into this, in other communities and across the country. Can you talk a little bit about the ways that we ensure that we see ensuring that, one, the affordable, so the apartments, the apartment building stay affordable, and then also with the attainable housing on some of the for purchases. Just go over a bit about the tools and where we're at in terms of how do you have a sustaining benefit from this initial good intention.
So yeah, great question. First, the apartment, I'll address those first, and then I'll do the for sale stuff. So the apartments is going to be done through a legally binding contractual relationship that CSU will have with the operator of the apartments. So basically what we will do is we will contract with someone to operate the apartments after they're built. And in that contract will be a legally binding that they will commit to offer those at the 80% AMI level or less in perpetuity for the existence of the contract. And AMI gets updated every year by the state of Colorado once they get the data from the federal government through Housing and Urban Development. So they get that. So that's how we'll guarantee that. It will be a legally binding contract that will bind that operator to offer those apartments at no more than that for as long as they exist. So that one is done through CSU holding that contract. Then on the for sale homes, there's going to be a couple options. One is going to be just through a sizing aspect, and it's kind of called the missing middle that's you find in Fort Collins. Is there's a certain size of home that happens to be missing that gets in that affordable level or attainable level. The current median house price in Fort Collins is about $420,000. So what we're going to do is we're going to have several townhomes and some of those paired homes that just due to their sheer sizing, they're a little bit smaller, are going to be below that median price and therefore begin to fall into those attainability levels. So that's one aspect, is just through, the size of the home. Second option that we are looking at as well is doing some deed restrictions on some percentage of these homes. And a deed restriction, what that basically does is it defines to whoever the buyer is that you can buy it at this reduced price, but when you sell it, it must be sold at that reduced price. And it's a legally binding arrangement when the deed is transferred. So you can't sell the home without it, going through the title company and ensuring that it is still maintaining that affordability aspect. So there's a couple aspects that we're looking at, and we're also looking at, depending on how things shake out with the planning, is potentially even land leasing some percentage of the land where we still maintain it, we CSU, and it's leased, where then we could enforce that sustained affordability or attainability aspect.
Good, thank you, Brett. Fred, I've got a question here for you regarding the remediation of the land and some of the discussions with the city. Can you talk us? The question here has to do with the cost of remediation of the land right now, if it were to be turned into open space, for instance, and then also that there had been previously an offer, that the city has considered this about open space. Fred, can you talk us through a little bit about what you're understanding?
Yeah, what we know about the site is through its use of 50 years as a stadium and a parking lot supporting the stadium, that it's a disturbed site. We've done a environmental assessment, phase 1 and phase 2, that would point out there's no contamination of the site, but there is extreme disturbance. So what I've heard our city's natural areas staff represent at City Council is this is upwards to $2 million of a remediation. So that remediation has to do with the soil, the lack of a varied topography, and then the disturbance of the vegetation. So we have invasive weeds, we've lost our soil, and then a parking lot is not conducive to habitat. We've got many flat graded plains. And then so I'd like to talk to, how does this compare to other developments along the Front Range as a redevelopment parcel, and how does that tie into sustainability? I think there's 3 major factors that point to this as a sustainable project, in addition to what is embedded in the project with over half open space. One is proximity, the closeness to goods and services and jobs, specifically CSU, and with that proximity comes availability of transit. The Elizabeth Street corridor today is the most traveled transit corridor in the city, and we're looking, the city and CSU are looking to invest in that as a max 2. So that would connect up to the Hughes Stadium site. 2 is the sustainability, just the existing infrastructure. There is water, sewer, stormwater, and roads already embedded into this project, where a new Greensfield project would not have that. So we have embedded energy, embedded infrastructure in the project, which is inherently more sustainable. And the third point is talking about sustainability, the alternative of having a redevelopment site that has been disturbed and bringing it into a new development option for affordable housing, among other things, versus the farms that are being redeveloped around town. It's a much better option from a kind of a global perspective. Redevelopment, proximity, and embedded utilities are a more sustainable option.
And Fred and Brett, I'm not sure who wants to talk about this one. The issue of traffic on Overland Trail and those sorts of impacts has come up since this is right in the middle of areas where people do live. Can one of you address a little bit about what the process would be around that discussion, if this were to move forward?
Well, Brett, I'll jump in. If the city would allow this to go through the development process with a plan that, as you've seen today, aligns with the city's overall planning goals, then a traffic study would be done for the project, and it would have to meet the traffic standards. There's nothing inherently about the project that is going to put traffic loads beyond what the city would accept. And in fact, the project could not go forward unless it met those standards, period.
And the only other thing I would add is related to traffic. And I think it's key to the sustainability, because there is some information out that by doing this development here, we're actually increasing the carbon footprint. There's actually, as we stated, there's a reduction to the carbon footprint of doing the development here versus doing it in other places. This property, it exists within about 3-mile radius of CSU. So there's a great chance that people are able to bike to work, you can take the public transportation, or even if they do drive, it's roughly a 6-mile round trip. In comparison to many of these folks that would be able to have the opportunity to live here are currently living in Wellington, they're living in Windsor. So they're doing a 25, 30-mile daily commute. When we talk about carbon emissions and things like that, this is going to be a reduction because of those reduced commuting miles of 1.5 million miles. So from a traffic standpoint, we believe, yeah, there will be, I mean, there's no disagreement. There will be additional traffic on Overland. We will be adding traffic there, but we'll be reducing traffic on many of the other areas like Fields and College and Mulberry and Drake, because all those people that are coming in from other parts of northern Colorado aren't going to have to anymore. So that's another thing to think about for traffic, is the overall traffic effects of this is a reduction.
There's a related question actually here. It says, can you address the commercial space in the plan that would create a walkable community? And maybe let's also roll in that buffer, the connection to the Maxwell open space and the buffer on the west side of the property. But so first the commercial space, walkable community idea, and then also the buffer to existing open space.
Yeah, so the commercial space, I think that's something we want to work with the community on. I think that's been another question we've received is, you know, how do we ensure that we're listening to the community, listening to our neighbors, doing as much as we can to accommodate, you know, what we hear. That's what's going to happen with the commercial space is when this project gets going forward, we're going to be having neighborhood meeting. And in that neighborhood meeting, we're going to understand, you know, what might those needs be. We've left it pretty much undefined at the moment. We would like to hear from the community what would be most advantageous to have out there. Now, it isn't enormous. We're talking about 20,000 total square feet, but what would be the most useful to have out there? So that's something that we're going to have a discussion with the community and the neighborhoods and understand, you know, those folks that live on the west side of town, what amenities would be most useful. And hopefully those are those things that are going to, you know, result in a more walkable community where you're not having to get in a car or take a bus to go for everything. And then the buffer space, as Mike said, we're doing what we can to leave that large buffer on that west side to ensure that there is, you know, connectivity to that Maxwell open space and that people can get to it easily with, you know, the trail integration, so that even from some of the parking lots where people are coming in from other parts of the community, they've got access through this property to get to all of that existing wonderful open space that's already there.
But one question that's come in here, why did CSU choose Lennar rather than a Fort Collins builder?
So it was and Fred knows this as well, so I'm also probably going to turn it over to Fred for a little detail. It was a competitive RFP. So for most of what we do with all of this, it'll be the same thing when we go out for the apartment complex and things like that, is we issue a request for proposal and we get proposals back from various entities. And then we assess these for which one provides the absolute best solution for the best price point, gives us the most. And in this competitive process that was operated in a public forum, Lennar was then chosen to be the most effective at meeting the criteria. Fred, would you add anything?
Yeah, I would say that as part of that RFP process, there was a preceding two community-wide neighborhood meetings that solicited feedback from the Fort Collins community. And so all of those that competed for that RFP had that information and were asked to tailor their solution, their proposal to what the community values were as represented in those neighborhood meetings.
Good, thank you. A broad question that's probably on people's minds at this moment in time on this. If the ballot initiative passes, won't that stop all of this from happening? Brett, do you want to explain that?
Yeah, so since this is CSU land and it's state land, we are committed to doing this project. This is a project we want to do. We do have, as a state agency, the ability to do development on our properties using a state-run process versus the city-run process. So you may have read about that in the newspaper. It was called the Site Plan Advisory Review, or SPAR process. That is a process where CSU can utilize a development process that is sanctioned by the state. We still do, though, go through all the various interactions with city staff. So we do traffic studies, environmental studies, and all of those. But that's what CSU would likely do. And it's because we're committed to this project. We want to ensure that we can provide some key amenities to our faculty and our staff, as well as the broader Fort Collins community.
How does the zoning of the current zoning, one question that came in here, relate to the project at hand? Fred or Brett, either one of you.
Go ahead, Fred.
Well, the zoning is, the history of the zoning in the site is it was in the county. It came into the city as a T transition zoning, which is its current zoning. So this is a ability for the city to zone without specifying density. And so the development plan will either have specific zoning districts or a planned unit development. So it, with the development plan, through a traditional city process, zoning will be approved at that time. This is where that opportunity was short-circuited by a city council who, in a very unique and unprecedented situation, determined that they would be the zoning body and not planning and zoning as recommended.
Good, thank you, Fred. Just catching up on all of the various questions here. Oh, this is good. Fred, this might be best for you also. Was the land natural before it was a stadium? What's its history? You've already spoken to that a bit, but we've also heard some of that, and there's been some analysis of that in some of the city meetings in the past couple of years, but also you're pretty aware of the history there. Yeah,
so through what we know of the site through aerial photographs and histories in our CSU archive, prior to the construction of the stadium in the mid-60s, it was a staging area for the construction of Horsetooth Reservoir and the dams associated with that. So then between 1949, when Horsetooth opened up, and the stadium, it had limited agricultural use and also had a rodeo arena and parking associated with it. So from the late 40s until Hughes Stadium time, it was a gravel pit, limited farming, and then another venue, a rodeo arena.
Good, thank you. A couple questions about this, the stadium and there have been some thoughts a while back that this money would be, that the proceeds from this project would go toward the stadium. That's changed. Brett, can you give some, just talk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was originally, when the plans were going through about, creating the new on-campus stadium, there was discussion, and part of the plan was to take the proceeds of whatever we would sell, whatever portion of this Hughes property to a third party, we would take those proceeds and put them into what was called the Stadium Reserve Fund to help fund any shortfalls that we might have in paying for the stadium financing over its period of time. Now, since that period of time, things have changed fairly dramatically. We've actually had a chance to operate the stadium. So that was when we were still planning for the stadium. And the new stadium, in its 2 years where we had fans, this last year we didn't actually operate the stadium with fans, but in the 2 years that it had fans, it far exceeded its plan. Its revenue and expense and its profit was much better than we had planned. So that was one aspect. And then also we continued to fundraise for that reserve fund, because that reserve fund was a combination of what we might get for the sale of this land, as well as donations from alumni and friends and supporters. And we continued to fundraise, and that reserve fund continued to grow and grow. So we're at a point now where that's no longer necessary because of the performance of the stadium and that the reserve fund is done much better than planned. So the current proceeds from this sale would go to two things. First, it would go to pay for the demolition of the Hughes Stadium. So we did have to demolish that, and we recycled it. We did it very sustainably and environmentally friendly. We recycled the concrete and the copper and the metal. So that came with the cost. So the first thing, it would pay for that. And then the remainder would be available to utilize for all sorts of things. And one is for possibly assistance related to this affordability, whether that be a down payment assistance program or other things. So those resources would be available to the Board of Governors, President McConnell, and Chancellor Frank to assess, and they're no longer planned to go into a stadium reserve fund.
All right, thanks, Brett. And a couple of there's this next question. President McConnell, you might want to jump in on this as well, and probably if any of you have things to add, please do. The question is about if there were a backup plan, if Hughes doesn't go forward, but also I think that raises the broader issues about other things, other places in the community where we're working on some of these important, complicated issues. And I should add, I mean, these issues around housing and childcare and transportation. That's part of what makes the community complex, right? These are really challenging issues that intertwine. There are not simple answers. We need to be able to hit on all of these points. And CSU this project isn't the only place where we're doing that. So I guess in sort of that sense of, is there a backup plan, but also the fact that we're committed community-wide to addressing these tough challenges as members of the community, and obviously a really key important force within the community. And President McConnell, do you want to take a first crack at some thoughts on that?
Thank you, Mike. I'd like to speak to this because it is very much a part of how we're thinking about long-term planning, not just for our campus community, but also for Fort Collins and Larimer County. We've had a lot of conversations with community groups and with the city about the need for affordable and attainable housing. It's been identified as one of the if not the primary need of the community in terms of continued quality of life. And so we're working with the city with various organizations on this. And in fact, we hired Debbie Mayer back into CSU, and she is a housing consultant, particularly on affordable and attainable housing. And she was with us and gave great counsel to many of our employees about affordable and attainable housing. But more significantly, she's directly connected to all of the nonprofits in the city who were working on these issues. In addition, there was a project that had already started and has really gained some steam, and that is affordable and attainable rental housing on Timberline. That is a CSU project. Brett can fill in more detail on that if we have time. time, but it is something that would provide a substantial number of rental opportunities that would be either affordable or attainable to CSU employees. It's also on a bus line. So that's another piece that we're currently working on. And then finally, the overall look at how we better support our employees in terms of childcare, attainable housing, healthcare. We are looking at all of that as part of the Courageous Strategic Transformation Plan. So even though we're focused on Hughes today, I think it's really important for everyone to understand that we're looking at this across the board with a very wide lens to try to identify the needs of our community, both on campus and off in the Fort Collins area, and to put a plan together for how we move forward into the future on these issues.
Yeah, and let me just add on to that. I think that was a great summary of it. And related to this plan, we've got a piece of property at Hughes, but we also have a small piece of property at Timberline that President McConnell referred to, that we're looking at all of our assets and trying to find ways to address these key needs of our employees. So we have a 5-acre parcel, so much smaller, but we've negotiated a process. We're going to swap some land with the Timberline Church, which is about 10 acres of their land for our 5 acres of land. And then we're contracting, very similar to this Hughes thing, with a developer to develop apartments for us and then contractually obligate them to provide these at an 80% AMI level. So when we talk about, our commitment, we're taking all of the assets that we can find that are out there to try to address this. And the Timberline project is well underway. We're in the middle of the planning process with the city. So that one's down the road and looking good. So it's just yet again another example where when we've got assets that are out there like a piece of land, we're trying to leverage those to do this affordability and attainability. And this will be another great aspect in addition to the Hughes that will come online for our employees in the coming years.
Good, thank you both. This is, we've got one question here that's a follow-up for some stuff Fred was talking about earlier. Fred, if this site needs the remediation you talk about, there seems to be a disconnect when you look out there and you see the trees that have been planted and that the trees seem to be growing. This is a question that someone asked in follow-up to what you were talking about. Can you explain a little bit about how those two ideas fit together? The fact that we do have trees growing out there, but yet the site needs as much remediation as you talked about?
Sure, Mark, thank you. I think that's talking about the ultimate intent of that remediation, and from the city's natural areas perspective, this is bringing it into a habitat-rich native grasslands, which would have been the condition prior to all of these development activities over the last 80 years. There have been successful tree plantings out at Hughes Stadium. Probably the most successful is the tree planting right along Overland Trail, which was done as seedlings with supplemental irrigation. Other tree plantings have been with difficulty. With the project in 2010 and 2011 to establish trees, we literally took a 10 by 10 by 4 chunk of shale out of the ground, loosened that up, amended that soil, and put trees back in. So that was a very expensive proposition. But yeah, there have been trees that have successfully been grown out there, but it's not the same intent as the remediation as its pre-development condition.
Got it. Thank you, Fred. Question here. This actually probably it's a specific question that looks at a broader issue. With the person who's asking is, will there be a playground area for the childcare? Maybe Brett, if you can talk a little bit about that, and also the fact that, as that conceptual plan that we're looking at, certainly with input and as the details of this come out, that's that's a concept at the moment. And so every last road and line on there is not necessarily where it's going to land, right?
Yeah, so there's an existing preliminary plan that's out there that does have a large playground associated, directly attached to the daycare center, fenced in with all the requirements there. And that's actually, we've sized it on the property. We have some detailed drawings that we could even show that, or send those out after this, that show it's about 50% larger than what is the typical daycare center playground area, because we wanted to have a large playground area out there and also, you know, create that amenity. So there's absolutely one right attached to the daycare center, 50% larger than you'd traditionally see with a daycare center.
Okay. Fred, I think this one might be for you. When we look at the idea of the wildlife in that area, there's been talk about a wildlife corridor in the discussion around Hughes in particular. And just to give us a bit of perspective, and Brett, you may have something to add here as well, when you look at where this is situated and what's around it, what would you want to add in terms of thoughts around the discussion on wildlife corridor that we hear recently around this?
Mike, I'll attempt to answer that. I would represent that the context of Hughes Stadium and the redevelopment, proposed redevelopment, is the seam between the foothills, wildlife corridors, habitat, and the and our urban condition. So those wildlife corridors exist. The Hughes Stadium, if it were not in its present condition, probably only marginally supports that, because it's boxed in by two major roads and a fairly denser, net denser housing development on the north than the proposal of Hughes Stadium. So it's it would be, if open space, it would, in my opinion, really just be a buffer to those wildlife corridors and great facilities that the city taxpayers have purchased over years, but it is not in itself that critical link as a part of a corridor.
Good, thanks, Fred. But this is one. The question is about affordable versus attainable, and that's really important. So people understand that, because both of those are part of this project and they aren't the same thing. So Brett, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So I'll use the definitions because they are, they're not interchangeable. And I saw a comment of, no, we're very intentionally using the words that we're using here, is that, so affordable housing is 80% AMI or less. That is the federal definition of it. Attainable, there is no federal definition of attainable housing. But what we've been using after talking to all the local Northern Colorado community housing folks like Neighbor to Neighbor, Habitat for Humanity, all those, they say that that is in that 80% to 120% AMI. So when we say attainable, we're in that 80 to 120. And when we say affordable, it's 80% or less. The reason we chose our apartments, for example, at 80% and the attainable at 80 to 120, is as we've talked to like Neighbor to Neighbor and Housing Navigator and those folks, there are other projects within Fort Collins that we're trying to dovetail on to solve a broader solution for all of Fort Collins. So there are several projects that are in the works in the 30 to 60% AMI, which is the lower end of affordable. And those are in the works. And when we talk to these groups, they said the piece that seems to be missing that you could make a big difference is around that 80%. So that's why we chose this. And those are the definitions of the affordables, the 80% or less. And if we can get this development done in the cost-effective way we're looking to do, we maybe can bring that down to 70. And then the attainable is in that 80 to 120%.
Actually, and building on that, we've had some interesting discussions with housing advocates and people who work in that space in the city. And one of the things that's, there's a broader discussion around things like down payment assistance and education, counseling for people on financial matters. And right, there's a lot that goes beyond something, some of the basic technicalities of getting yourself into that home, right? How do you do it? What are the various tools available to you? That has also been a big part of the discussion of moving forward. How can this be sort of a comprehensive way of helping our employees be able to really tackle this important part of sort of financial life sustainability, I guess I would call it. Right, has that struck you like it has me as we've had some of those discussions, that there really is a rich combination of places that CSU really stands to help sort of convene some of these voices and make sure some of that information that's most helpful to people gets out, and that how this project could be really useful to a lot of people beyond just the sheer housing that's available.
Yeah, and the other thing I saw one in here, and I know we've been throwing this term AMI around, and again, we could provide this as AMI is the area median income. And it's not a specific dollar figure. And the reason being is, so every year the federal government puts out, and then it goes to the state, and there's a published table. We can send you this table. It basically is then by county. So we're using the Larimer County AMIs, and the AMI it's the income of the entire family. So if there are two individuals that are earning money, it takes it together, and then it depends on the number of people. So the AMI for one person, an 80% AMI for one person, is a lot different than an 80% AMI for 6 people. So that's why this number scales. So we can't just throw out, and it shows it for various, what a 1-bedroom apartment rent would be for an 80% AMI for one person, 2 persons, right? So we can send that table out. It's a state published document, comes out every spring. It shows what these exact rent and mortgage payment levels would be for each of those.
Good, thanks, Brett. There's a couple of questions having to do with something, Fred, that I think you can distinguish for us here. The idea between remediation needed at the property and whether the land is contaminated. Can you talk a little bit more about that, since the idea here is that people would be living on this land, or even right now there may be people walking through it?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. The phase 1 and phase 2 environmental assessment of the site indicates that there's no contamination, and this is verified through soil samples and borings. What the site is disturbed meaning that the uses of the site have interrupted the natural, water cycle. We have a parking lot. We've regraded the site. It's become a non-natural state, not contaminated. It doesn't need interventions that a contaminated site would have, but to remediate it, then building the soil back, creating topography, introducing the vegetation that would create a more natural state.
Good. And there's one other quick question, then we're going to close it out here shortly. But one more thing, Brett, can you just clarify again, is this just for university employees, the housing?
So what we intend to do with the apartments, the housing, the whole thing is provide a first right of refusal to CSU employees. So we want to offer it up to our CSU employees, of which President McConnell mentioned. We've hired Debbie Mayer to be our housing navigator to help figure out exactly what that process is, who's eligible, how do we ensure eligibility, what happens. But they'll go to CSU people first, and then should CSU employees not absorb all of it, then it would be available to the community at those same price points. So CSU has first priority, and if we can utilize 100% of the apartments and purchase 100% of the homes, they'd be all CSU. But if not, then they become available to the community and a community asset.
Great. Thanks, Brett. And thanks everybody, all the panelists for your time, and all of you for your questions as well. If you have any questions or comments you'd like to send our way, and we do have more questions in the chat that we need to get to, we will answer those that have a contact information. But here's an email address to send questions and comments to. It is csusysteminfo@colostate.edu. I'll read that again. csusysteminfo, all one word, csusysteminfo@colostate.edu. And again, thank you so much to everyone for being here. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to President McConnell for some closing words.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you everyone for participating in this really important meeting today. I truly appreciate all your questions. As always, we're not able to get to all of them, but as Mike said, we'll be responding to as many of them as possible. I also want to thank all of you who participated via the Q&A for your wonderful ideas. We'll be taking these into consideration and really appreciate your feedback. We have wanted to have these sessions to make sure that we're engaged in an inclusive process, and your advice and counsel on these issues is very much appreciated. Thank you again and have a wonderful day.